Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
here we go. So, this is interesting being up here together because Zach and I have known each other for a while now and had this opportunity to sort of say, why don't we get on stage and bring both of our perspectives to the audience? You heard a little bit about my background and just being an advocate in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And part of that journey has been to learn more about what accessibility means in the workplace. But I don't live that every single day. And Zachary is a really amazing teacher to me to learn more about the things that we need to do, that I need to do when bringing in these strategies to organizations. So we're going to share a little bit about ourselves, share a little bit about what we can do as allies in this space, and some practical actions that you can take moving forward to really think about how you can activate this change inside your organizations and, truthfully, in your every single day. So I will turn it over to Zach to do his introduction. You're on the big screen up here too,
Wow.
so.
That's scary right there, that monster Zach. But yeah, my name is Zachary Weeks. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to you folks. Thank you to Goodwill for inviting us. As you've heard, I'm a disability advocate here in Edmonton, and have been so for a while now, but I wasn't always that guy. I'll maybe dive into a little bit about my story and how we got here. Growing up as a kid with a disability, very similar to Kelty, who we just heard about, I absolutely hated my life. I wanted nothing to do with people with disabilities. I hated being in a wheelchair. I didn't like my AFOs, all those things. I looked different. That said, I lived a very normal life, quote unquote, normal, in that my mom was always there to treat me just like any other kid. But nonetheless, I still missed out on a variety of different activities. I'd be watching all my friends playing hockey and different sports, and on the playground, they weren't accessible. And so I was on the sidelines virtually my whole childhood, watching the world pass me by. Fast forward to, my later teens, I still didn't really identify as disabled. And I guess in a way I did, but I didn't, if that makes sense. Obviously, yes, I'm disabled. This is the way life is going to be. But on a deeper level, I didn't really accept my disability. There were many nights, similar to Kelty again, that I would cry myself to sleep, night in, night out, saying, why me? Why did, the higher powers strap this 400-pound steel ball to my ass and have to wheel around, not fully participating in society. And I remember I was, I think, 17 at the time, and I was having this giant meltdown. Essentially, it was just a giant pity party on myself now that I'm older, but it was critical in forming who I am today and who I hope to be in the future. And that's where it hit me like a ton of bricks that, maybe all this was for a reason. Maybe I was born this way for a reason. Maybe I was born to stand out. And all those years I wasted trying to fit in when I was born to stand out. And as soon as I really accepted that, it was so weird. Everything turned 180 and things just started to line up. The universe answered, and thus here I am. So that's a little bit about me, but nonetheless, this is about you and learning how you can, as HR professionals or employers or even allies or disabled people, can start to move the needle on employment. So why don't we dive into that, Erin?
Thanks, Zach. I think part of that journey and diving into what we can do as advocates, I want to share a little bit about my story, because I don't stand here without a story as well, and navigating the world as my unique self, which we all have our own stories to share. And I had a point in time in my life, similar to Zach, where I kind of had the light bulb moment go off. So bear with me as I share a little bit about this. When Zach saw when I put my slides together, he was like, "What are you talking about here?" But I had the opportunity to attend a presentation with an amazing speaker who I really connected with. And in true Erin Davis style, I reached out to them afterwards and said, "Hey, can we go for a coffee?" So that's what we did. We went for a coffee, and they do a lot of work in the leadership space. And so in that coffee conversation, I learned about a leadership program that was being offered. And the behind the scenes on this is actually pretty funny, because the program was starting in less than a month, and there was opportunity to get government funding, so it meant a bunch of forms. And so I had to really lean into my network to really help me put my application in for this program. But I got into the leadership program. And the main instructor in this program, who is a dear friend now, talked about the burning platform. And so as I thought about what that meant for me and my work, I realized that was, how do I advocate? How can I look around and see more women in leadership that look like me? And so based on my career, it really has been looking up and not seeing representation, similar to what Katie was talking about. I think this is truly how we become advocates, when we see the world not as we are, but through the lenses of others. And so I, from that moment on, talk about my burning platform and seeing more women that look like me. And so through that, I actually ended up taking on a position that allowed me to do just that. And it was a great experience to understand the change I wanted to see in the world, but again, start to see the change that was possible as we create a more inclusive world. And so I was really fortunate with that work to actually win an award for it. So I, kind of started to tell myself, maybe you can do this. It's not what I went to school for, which I think is also a really important lesson in this as well. And I think Katie even speaks to this too. It's like, we kind of live in a society that's like, you have to do these things until you can then do the other things. And I'm here to tell you that if you are really passionate about something, I really believe that you can take that step forward and be an advocate for others. So that took me again into another job that I ended up being able to work full-time doing diversity and inclusion work, and really understanding the research that surrounds this space, because I think it's part of the dialogue that we also have to bring into what we do, is sometimes data is the language that people understand. And so it was really great to see some of those statistics up there in terms of the number of individuals within Canada that live with disabilities every single day. There's underrepresented groups from many different intersections, and that really is what I advocate for, is how can we make sure that we see that representation in leadership. We see that representation across organizations. So anyways, the rest of the story is I made an observation that maybe I could start my own business and do this full time. So that's what I did 2 years ago. And in that opportunity, I got to meet Zach, and we sat on a panel together, and just like my first part of the story, really admired what he was sharing, and so we went and had a coffee, and now we're doing a presentation together. So I share all of that because it's not complicated, it's actually pretty simple, and sometimes we also look at people's stories and go, how did they get there? I want to do that, but step by step, we can do that. So in my time working in this space, a little bit of a foundational element, and if anyone in the audience was here last year, I did talk about this model, but I want to share it again because I think it's so important to lay the foundation of doing this work in advocacy. So as we think about inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, IDEA, I lived in this space when it was just diversity and inclusion. So we've added a lot of acronyms into that definition. And so why are we doing that? Because we want to make sure that no one gets left behind. And accessibility often was left behind. There was a lot of misnomers around in the organizations I worked in that it was too costly to create these changes, that it wasn't going to be, there wasn't that many people that really needed extra accessibility. And so I think that had to do with the fact that people weren't comfortable actually raising their hand to say that they needed support. So when we do this work, it's going to be so important for us to show up with humility. We're not going to get it right. We're not going to be able to hold the space for every single intersecting identity, but we can show up and know that if we screw up, if we potentially say the wrong thing, if we don't have all of the information, we can actually pause and say, I can actually bring that in to my knowledge. We have to have empathy and understand that everyone's lived experience is different than our own. How can we place ourselves and understand the experiences of others? Well, we do that by getting to know them and understanding their story. Authenticity means that our story is important too, so we can share that in our dialogue and in our conversations. Resiliency is knowing that this work, I keep pointing to Katie's story because she just shared it, but she just started this work in 2020, right? Like, there's so much work, and there's going to be so many roadblocks that come our way, so that resiliency comes to building community and having others that are there as well to help to support you in creating that change and building that accessibility into your work. And curiosity, I always have to give the caveat, it's not the perfect acronym. I've pulled the T from partway through the word. But curiosity is also so important to build our knowledge. And I'm going to share at the end some really great resources that you can start to build in. Actually, here's a question for the audience. How many people in the audience have seen Push on CBC? Okay. Yeah. Awesome. I also binged it when it first came out. But if you haven't seen it, it's such a great opportunity to start to see that representation live and start to see the experiences of others. So we'll talk more about curiosity at the end. And so I'm going to read this Brene Brown quote. True belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our own level of self-acceptance. And so I often say to audiences that the one thing that's always within our control is how we show up and how do we map that path forward in terms of understanding more about accessibility and bringing that into our day-to-day experiences. So I will turn it over to Zach and take us through removing the barriers of accessibility.
Yeah, so I mean, as Erin said, the most important thing I think that you can do is to show up, and as Erin said, you're gonna get it wrong, but as long as you're authentic in that approach, I don't think there's gonna be any concerns, or there shouldn't be anyways. Speaking in terms of removing the level, or the high level of removing accessibility, it really doesn't have to be overly complicated. it's really just using common sense a lot of times. But again, this is why it's such a privilege to be here, so I can remind and sort of help you out with that piece. As employers, I started in the workforce when I was 17 years old, really an anomaly in terms of getting out that young and actually having a job that I had to go to at that age compared to my disabled peers or even my non-disabled peers. But, as the slide said, the key to me being able to go to work in a workplace that accepted me for who I was and I could be my authentic self was really step one of breaking down that accessibility barrier or fear. As I mentioned earlier, growing up, I had this very narrow viewpoint of, growing up, who's going to hire me as a disabled person? There's all these extra things to consider, yada, yada, yada. But why don't we jump into the tangibles that you can bring forward? For me, it always starts outside of the building. Obviously, step one is making sure that anyone can get in the building, having an accessible doorway, parking. That's really step one. Once you get into hiring someone with a disability, empathy is where you really need to put your focus, I think, because there's going to be some minor tweaks that you're going to have to do. For example, having a little bit more flexibility on meeting times, having an accessible washroom. There's so many buildings and offices that don't have accessible washrooms, and really I plan my day around what place has a washroom, because we all deserve the right to go to the washroom. And so that's one key piece, and making sure that it's actually accessible for more than just people with physical disabilities, being mindful of those invisible disabilities as well. When you're looking at your website, is it even accessible? Everybody, the first place they go to nowadays is a website or social media. So making sure that you're using plain language and your images are captioned with alt text. Same goes for social media. I see so many pieces of great info going out, even from the disability community, that aren't following those best practices of describing what the photo is for those with vision loss. Speaking of vision loss, if you're hiring someone with blindness, making sure that they have the proper tools in place to succeed. It's as simple as getting screen readers and that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting because, as Erin mentioned, these bigger organizations, they sort of say, oh, well, what about the extra costs? but at the same time, we don't balk at if someone needs an extra monitor for their screen or a certain ergonomic keyboard so they don't get carpal tunnel from typing all day. It's really the same situation when you're working with people with disabilities, is being practical in what they need to be the best that they can be. And one thing I will say is anyone who has hired someone with a disability, I can guarantee you they will likely be the hardest worker in the room because they have this chip on their shoulder, so to speak. They have this inherent need to prove people wrong, and that's just a subset of the systemic ableism that we still have to battle, of thinking of people with disabilities are less. And that is absolutely not the case as long as the accessibility is there. So yeah, just in summary, it doesn't have to be this big daunting thing. Start small and do little micro actions, and most importantly, I think you need to work with the person with the disability and know that, yeah, you're gonna have to ask questions, but really, you asking questions shouldn't prevent you from hiring the best candidate. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm sorry if someone is able to make you more successful as an organization. I don't care what their abilities are or the color of their skin or what they identify as in terms of pronouns and that sort of thing. I want the best candidate, and I'm willing to invest in the company, and that's what investing in disability is all about.
Thanks, Zach. And you're making me think about, some of my experience inside of organizations. And I know I said the one thing that's within our control is how we show up. But the other part of this is collaboration. And I know you've talked about this as well, because some of the organizations I've worked in have had 22,000 employees. And so I wasn't going to be able to solve all of those issues and barriers on my own. And so sometimes we have to build relationships, build trust, build collaboration inside of our organization and create more champions who can help to remove some of these barriers. And even if they're small, right, that accessibility piece on a website sounds easy. We just need to find the right person to do that. But making sure that becomes a priority in a long list of priorities that sometimes we don't necessarily push up these things that are really important from an accessibility perspective. And so it's bringing into our conscious mind why this is so important. So we're accessing talent, all available talent, not just a certain subset of individuals. And so if your website isn't accessible, that means that not necessarily everyone's going to be able to go on there and see what jobs are out there and be able to even put into consideration if that's something that they want to apply for. So a little bit in conclusion, and then we'll share some more resources. But this is a daily practice, and we've got to set the stage to really think about how are we pausing throughout our day, thinking about how we can make things more accessible. How are we having conversations with others to understand what their needs are? We can't just make assumptions. And for me, be in a place that isn't fearful that you're going to get it wrong, but be in a place that you can continue to move forward. And so this constant recalibration towards change is going to be important. And so as you hear from speakers today, there's opportunities to reach out and have conversations with them so they can share their knowledge with you. So this is a bit of a rapid fire, but we're going to share a bunch of different ways that you can start to bring in new knowledge. And so the first one up here is through film. So if you haven't seen Special or Atypical on Netflix, really great opportunity to see actually someone with CP on screen and their story, someone who is on not neurotypical through Special. And then, I don't know, has anyone seen CODA? Okay, this is child of deaf adults, and so getting to hear about and learn about that disability. And then Crip Camp was really amazing. It's on Netflix, and really, part of me becomes disheartened because it takes place in the 60s and 70s and really talks about a lot of disability advocacy in the US at that time. And then you sort of fast forward to 2023 and question how far we've come, but that's how I got to learn about the advocacy that Judy Heumann has done. She passed away, unfortunately, this year, but just has been such an important advocate in the disability space. If streaming shows isn't your thing, here's some books. The Future is Disabled, Demystifying Disability, Year of the Tiger, Crip Kinship, and Disfigured. And I will openly say I've not read all of these yet, so this is like my homework and to-do. And then the last one here is also there's so many teachers, there's so many social media apps that are out there, but this is a list of TikTok influencers that can also be really great teachers, so we can reprogram our minds in terms of who we're seeing, in terms of representation, and also learning about their experiences as well. From Zach and I, thank you so much for listening. We look forward to building community with you. And Zach, final words?
Never leave me with final words. Final words, no, it's just a pleasure to be here, and hopefully, the tips that we provided on our slide deck are helpful. And I think just to reiterate that, this doesn't have to be this big daunting process in terms of, ooh, do I do this or do that? I think just showing up and being authentic in your approach for inclusion is going to be appreciated by your perspective, higher, and it goes a long way. So thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations.
Well, I'm glad you guys didn't leave the stage just yet. So that's fantastic. Honestly, great presentation. I just have a couple questions for you both. Let's start with Erin. Erin, you basically presented on diversity and inclusion last year. This was a little bit different. What brought you two together, and how was this presentation different and better?
Okay, I'll be vulnerable and share what was better. Is I was so nervous last year when I presented. It was one of the first presentations that I did live in person since the pandemic, so I felt a little bit more natural being up here today. But what brought us together, I think, was our own curiosity, probably more so mine, to learn from Zach and the work that he's doing in the accessibility space. When I started doing D&I over like 10 years ago, it was diversity and inclusion. And when I've gone through a switch to talking about it as inclusion and diversity. Through the pandemic, we added an E of equity. And through continual conversations with community, we keep missing the A, that accessibility piece. And so we thought we could bring together sort of my lived experience of bringing strategies into organizations and this piece on accessibility that Zach speaks about. And I don't know, you can answer that question too.
Yeah, no, I very similar to Erin. While I'm very, well known in the disability community, I don't want to pigeonhole myself into just being, specializing on disability. So I also wanted to glean knowledge from Erin in terms of, her story and being from a larger corporation and sort of identifying, what's behind the curtain in terms of what big organizations think. Obviously, we have this exterior voice that we get from larger corporations that, yes, we're inclusive, let's do this all together, but yet you don't see the diversity in their like promo materials and that sort of thing. And yeah, that's sort of answering that question. It was again a little bit of selfishness for me to be able to learn from Erin, given her experience, and yeah.
All right, and this question is for Zach. Zach, you obviously are an advocate, a consultant, and you're also born to stand out. That was in your quote earlier, and there's no question about that because of your advocacy. How can we be better as advocates for the disability community?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've noticed in my community, in the disability community, is, and one of the things that I always practice myself is that I only speak to what I know. I am one experience. I have cerebral palsy. I use a power wheelchair. I have a physical disability. I'm never speaking on other topics such as, hearing loss or vision challenges. I always defer to those with those lived experiences. Now, you will get some more cantankerous individuals in the disability community, wherein that they don't want anyone speaking about disability unless it's someone with a disability, which I get. But at the same time, we are nothing without our allies. Every big marginalized group has not done it alone. You look at the LGBTQ community, you look at the indigenous community. Yes, they are led by those people with lived experience, but they had a lot of help getting there. And so I think the best way that you guys can be advocates, you guys and ladies and everybody in the crowd can be advocates, is to ask how you can help, like you just did, and then go from there.
Very good words. Any key takeaways other than that you'd like the crowd to know about?
No, I mean, again, it doesn't, I really don't want it to be this big, daunting thing with respect to making things more inclusive, right? It's all about those micro nudges that we had on the screen, and you're not going to get it perfect. The world's never going to be 100% inclusive or accessible, but that doesn't mean that we can't be 98%. So.
Those words are absolutely fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Zachary Weeks and Erin Davis.
Thank you.